The story begins with the system congratulating the player for clearing everything, and the guy happily says that he did it. A guy with black hair looks at his computer screen and with a very joyful expression on his face says that he finally beat this damn game. He raises his hands and says that he was finally able to finish this. People in the comments congratulate him and write that he is a real crazy person for being able to beat this game. He is the first in the world to do this. This is a game famous for its almost impenetrable difficulty, Empire Defense. And now, 10 years after its release, someone was finally able to get past it. And this person is precisely he. The guy rolls back in his chair and asks, he told them all, right? He puts the microphone to his mouth and says that no matter how difficult the game is, it exists for him to beat it. This guy is a game streamer who only plays the most difficult games. Even his nickname is Classic Nerd. He has 2,340,000 subscribers and 172 videos. He thanks the Good Fox donator for $300, laughs and says that it's all thanks to them. They really did a great job. He was the first person to beat this absurdly difficult game in its 10 years of existence. He says that, to be honest, his technique isn't much. He thinks about it and says that he was just incredibly cool. He notices something that catches his attention and thinks there is something he regrets. One of the commentators wrote that he was so sorry that the saint died in the final battle. For an R-rank character, she was very good. The streamer's face became sad, and he sat silently for several seconds. He thinks it might be because the audience became attached to the characters while he was playing, but they were hoping that everyone would survive the final battle. However, in the end, except for the main character, Lucas, everyone died. His goal was still to complete the game, not to save all the characters. After the final boss, the Princess of the Lake, unable to sleep, the game was over. The system window says that the last level has been completed. MVP level Lucas SSR. Hellish difficulty and Man of Steel mode completed. The player's name is number 1 in the Classic Nerd rankings. The streamer looks at the screen and thinks that, however, Lucas did not move an inch in front of the boss he killed, surrounded by the corpses of allies and enemies. He sits still, continues to be silent, and wonders why this is happening. Even if he is just a game character, his back looks so sad. His computer screen goes dark, and the credits start to roll with the one person who created this game. The guy put his head on his hand, looks at it, and thinks that now it's somehow better. He looks at his computer screen, and something catches his attention. The commentator writes, "Shouldn't the developer reward him somehow?" The streamer chuckled and asked why he would do this. Another commentator writes that their studio was literally destroyed due to an unplayable game, but he was able to prove the opposite. At the very least, they should thank him. The streamer says he played purely for fun. He doesn't need any reward. As long as he can have fun with everyone, everything will be fine. People write that they should look at the greed in his eyes. He is betting that he will gladly accept the reward if offered. The streamer starts laughing and says that he doesn't need anything. He thinks that this developer disappeared many years ago. During these 10 years, he created nothing. He doesn't care that someone beat his game. Suddenly, a system window appears on one of his monitors with a letter from the developer. "Hello, Classic Nerd." He is the director of Empire Defense. This attracts the streamer's attention, and he looks at it. He leans closer and looks at this message with great surprise. All the spectators were very surprised by what was happening and began to write question marks in the chat. In the next window of the system, it is written that first of all, he would like to thank him. He no longer hoped that anyone would beat his game. The streamer silently looks at this with very strong surprise and wonders, is this all happening for real? The system window says that. However, seeing how he dealt with it, he felt relieved. He wants to thank him again for this. The streamer is embarrassed by this, scratches his head, and says that he shouldn't thank him. In the system window, it is written that he is glad that they still have hope. The streamer looks at this with confusion and wonders what this means. Is he doing something like the second part of Empire Defense? The system window says that he has proven his abilities and worth. He must come to them and help. The streamer looks at this with a blank expression on his face and asks, what does this mean? He wonders, is the developer trying to attract attention? There's no way a game developer would sit on his stream. He should just kick him out. He calls him by his nickname with a smile and asks, or would it be better to say self-proclaimed developer? Suddenly his monitor begins to distort and the system window begins to emit a bright light. The streamer feels bad while he is about to say something about this with a smile, but suddenly stops. His consciousness begins to blur and he wonders what is going on. He starts to fall out of his chair and wonders, is it because he played too much? He looks at his monitors as he passes out, falls to the floor and thinks that his viewers will probably call an ambulance if they see him faint. A message appears on the screen. Thank you for playing Empire Defense. Sometime later, something falls to the ground at very high speed with very loud sounds. Suddenly, the streamer opens his eyes and looks forward with very strong surprise. He found himself in another world and in different clothes. He stands up sharply and screams loudly out of surprise. He breathes heavily and wonders what that sound was. He notices that there is a large stone pillar in front of him, which was destroyed by some kind of magical shot, and a lot of debris is flying towards him. The streamer screams very loudly out of surprise and asks what is going on here. He presses himself to the ground and covers his head with his hands as large pieces of stone fall near him. He begins to slowly rise to his feet while a large amount of smoke surrounds him, causing him to cough. He gets to his feet, covers his face with his hand and wonders, is this the smell of gunpowder? Suddenly, several guards next to him loudly shoot from their cannons, and this greatly surprises him. Because of his very strong surprise, he fell to the ground and continues to look at it. He continues to look at it for a few more seconds with a surprised expression on his face and says nothing. Suddenly, a very strong explosion occurs behind him, which greatly frightened him. The streamer turns around with a very displeased expression on his face and loudly asks what is happening here. They should stop this already. He noticed something that attracted his attention and looked at it with great surprise. He notices an army of warriors in armor, with spears and shields, and asks, what is this? He sits still while these warriors run at someone and loudly say that they must be faster. They can't let them get in. The streamer looks at everything that happens around him with a blank expression on his face and says nothing. He continues to look at it, sitting on the ground and wondering what is going on here. The guards who stand on the wall shoot from their crossbows. Other warriors fight with spears and green liquid pours on them. The streamer silently looks at all this and wonders, is this war? One of the guards pays attention to him and is very surprised when he notices him. He runs to him and asks loudly, His Imperial Highness? The streamer turns to this warrior with a blank expression on his face and looks at him. A warrior with a very scary expression runs towards him and loudly asks the Lord if he is okay. The streamer opened his mouth very wide out of fear and surprise and began to think, could this be an enemy soldier? He falls to the ground, swings his legs, screams loudly out of fear, and asks him not to come near him. The man does not listen to him, continues to walk, which greatly frightens him, and he says loudly that he told him not to come. He looks at a very surprised man who has stopped in front of him and is trembling very much. Suddenly he drops his sword on the ground and it makes a loud sound. The man kneels and lowers his head in front of him, after which he says that he asks for forgiveness from His Highness. Tears flow down his face and he says that he asks for mercy to be shown towards his insignificant servant. The streamer looks at him blankly and wonders what's wrong with this old man. He slowly rises to his feet and does not take his eyes off the man. He moves closer to the trembling man and calls out to him to get his attention. He doesn't pay attention to something that flies in their direction and says that he must calm down first. He is very surprised when he notices what was flying in their direction. It hits the wall next to him, explodes, and throws the streamer very hard to the side. He falls to the ground and slides several meters along the ground. He tries to get up, but his body is shaking violently because of what just happened. He breathes very heavily out of surprise and wonders what is happening. Was it a bomb? He notices that a very bright green glow appears next to his hand. He sees a green fire that touched the people caught in the explosion. The streamer looks at this with great surprise and asks what's going on. A warrior stops next to him, points at something and loudly says that the enemy is attacking them. This attracts the streamer's attention, and he looks in the direction where this warrior pointed. He keeps pointing at the wall and loudly saying that they can't let them climb the walls. One of the warriors runs with a sword in his hands and shouts loudly. Suddenly, something pierces his body with enormous force. The streamer looks at what is happening with great surprise. He sees how one of the huge tentacles pierced the warrior and he dropped his sword. Another tentacle cut off the hand of this warrior, and this hand flies a long distance along the ground. This hand falls next to the streamer, who sits on the ground and looks in surprise at what is happening around him. The blood from this hand splashes next to him, and this blood falls on his face. He was very frightened by what happened, crawls back and looks at this hand, which lies at his feet. The tentacles of an unknown monster continue to attack the warriors, who cannot do anything about it and scream loudly because of the pain. The bodies of these warriors fall to the ground as blood flows from their wounds. The streamer looks at everything that is happening with fear and shock and wonders what is hiding behind this wall. A huge spider that was behind the wall gets inside this fortress and moves around making loud sounds. This monster stops in front of the streamer and looks at him with its many red eyes. The eyes of this huge spider light up and it emits a very loud scream, which makes it cover its ears with its hands. The streamer continues to sit still, covering his ears with his hands and wondering, is this a spider? Several warriors are running towards this spider, one of whom loudly says that the army is already here. They must immobilize him. He does not have time to finish because a huge spider quickly runs towards them and easily defeats all these soldiers. The streamer sits still and realizes that his body is trembling with fear. A huge fart that just defeated all these warriors slowly walks towards him with loud sounds. The streamer looks at this monster with horror and wonders, is this a dream or is he hallucinating? This is simply impossible. The spider raises one of its legs and is about to attack it, while he thinks that it should not touch him. The monster mercilessly and very quickly lowers its paw and is about to attack him. The streamer looks at this with very strong horror and thinks that he doesn't want to die like that. Suddenly a guy with yellow hair comes running to him, calling him His Highness. He very quickly draws his sword from its sheath and is about to say something, but pauses. He pulls out his sword, from which very strong energy emanates, and looks at this monster with glowing blue eyes. He makes a very strong blow with his sword, into which he directs a large amount of his energy and defeats this huge spider with just this blow. The defeated monster falls to the ground with a loud sound, while this knight turns to the streamer who is sitting on the ground. He looks at him with a wide smile and asks, "Isn't denying reality too trivial?" The streamer looks at him with very strong surprise and cannot say anything due to his strong surprise. The knight who stands in front of him was very surprised when he noticed something that attracted his attention. He kneels in front of him and in a concerned voice asks His Highness why he is in this form. He is very worried while he looks at him and asks if he was hurt. The streamer looks at him and thinks his face looks very familiar. He remembers a character from a game he played before, standing with a sad look. He recognizes him and with a very surprised expression on his face asks, "Is he Lucas?" He was very shocked when he said his name. Tears flowed down his face and he says that he knew it. He wipes his tears and says that he still hurt his head. He grabbed the streamer's hands, lifted him off the ground, and with a joyful expression on his face said that, however, he was sincerely happy that he began to call him by name. Even though he had been his guard all his life, he still couldn't remember his name. The streamer looks at him with very strong surprise because of what he just said and wonders, what was that? Lucas looks at him with a blank expression on his face, and he thinks, so is it really him? What does all of this mean? The streamer turns away from him with a very surprised expression on his face and thinks that this cannot happen. He looks to the side, standing on a huge wall that is being attacked with bombs right now. He sees a huge fortress, towards which a huge army of large spiders is running. He looks at all this and asks loudly, so he moved to Empire Defense? Sweat starts running down his face and his body shakes really hard and he thinks it's terrible. This is the highest difficulty game he beat right before coming here. He looks at the many huge spiders that are running towards the fortress and thinks that this is a game that consists entirely of slaughter. There are endless hordes of incredibly powerful monsters here. He turns away from these monsters and, with an incredibly surprised expression on his face, thinks that he has found himself in a real hell. A green liquid emerges from the backs of these huge spiders. The monsters shoot this liquid towards the castle with loud sounds. This liquid hits the walls and explodes very violently. One of these projectiles hits the wall next to the streamer and explodes, and he covers his face with his hands. He looks at what is happening with great horror and wonders why he ended up in the game. Lucas loudly calls out for his Imperial Highness. The streamer turns to him and calls him by name with a surprised expression on his face. Lucas grabs him by the shoulders and says that the enemy that is encroaching on them is an army of black spiders. The forward operating base is on the verge of destruction, but these spiders become weak at sunset. The sun will set in 30 minutes. He stops talking and very quickly takes his sword out of its sheath. He turns around and notices that they are surrounded by several of these spiders. Lucas stands still and with a calm expression tells His Highness that he must do whatever it takes to hold out. The streamer looks at him and wonders why he is so desperate to protect him. They all call him the same, His Imperial Majesty. Who is he anyway? Sometime later, when evening came and the fire was extinguished, many soldiers help the wounded and loudly say that he is still breathing. They should bring a stretcher here. Lucas, whose armor was covered in the blood of monsters, sheathes his sword and goes somewhere. He straightens his hair and says that sunset has finally come. The army of black spiders began to retreat. He was embarrassed because the streamer did not answer him and called him. At this time he is standing on the wall and with a sad expression on his face, silently looking at something. He sees a huge number of monster corpses and large debris that lie on the ground. A little further from the wall you can see a huge number of corpses of spiders, from which arrows and broken spears stick out. The streamer calls Lucas, who stands next to him and asks where he is and when is this happening. Lucas says that this is the last day of February in the year 649 according to the imperial calendar. It is the forward operating base of Crossrod, the walled city. The streamer looks straight at him with an angry expression on his face and says that this means that tomorrow will be the 1st of March of the year 649. Lucas looks at him with a calm expression and says that's exactly how it is. The streamer thinks that the 1st of March 649 according to the imperial calendar, a forward operating base against monsters. He narrowed his eyes very much and thinks that this is a painfully familiar situation in a painfully familiar place. Of course it is. After all, for all those 6 months that he spent on Empire defense, this was each time the time and place where he began his training, which he has passed thousands of times. He says with a very worried expression that he turns out to be Ash. He turns around and with a very displeased expression on his face says loudly that his name is Ash. Ash Bonhatter Everblack. Lucas looks at him with a calm expression and tells His Highness that everything is exactly as he said. The streamer grabbed his hair very tightly and loudly asked why this happened. Why is he this particular freak? He is the crazy third prince of the Empire. The worst commander, responsible for the death of most of the soldiers in the fortress city. And also, the character who will meet the worst end in training. He continues to hold his head with intense horror on his face and wonders why he has to be this idiot. After some time in the special housing of the commanders, Streamer in Ash's body looks at himself in the mirror and says that he is a stupid idiot. Couldn't we just sit quietly in the city? Why did he need to leave his damned castle? He calmed down a little, took a deep breath, and said that he would go so crazy. This is a regular Empire defense game. The reason why this game is known for its nightmarish difficulty. He remembers that there are only 2 difficulty levels, the highest hellish mode and the Man of Steel mode, which forcibly saves progress. He thinks the reason is the complexity of Helman of Steel, which combines these 2 modes. And he is the only person who is able to complete this regime. No matter where the game takes him, he is confident that he can find a way out of the situation. Except for this damn training. Ash calls the system window, which immediately appears in front of him and thinks that this level is impossible to pass. The training is made in such a way that he will lose in any case, no matter how hard he tries. Because the story begins with Lucas escaping from invading monsters alone. In this game, which lasts for 3 years, the army of black spiders are monsters that can be hunted after reaching halfway through the 2nd year. And how should he defeat them at the very beginning of the game? He slaps himself in the face and thinks that this is not true. He must concentrate. because he is a classic nerd. He looks with a very determined look and thinks that he has already played this game. If he combines his knowledge and experience, he will definitely be able to find a way out. He was very confused when he saw the system window and thinks that he has no way out. Ash looks at the windows of the system in front of him, laughs, and says that this is horror. He has huge problems, right? What's wrong with these spiders levels anyway? 55th level. Level 60? Besides, there are almost 1,000 of them. What is going on? Ash looks at the system window with the artifact and says that, in addition, the strength of the castle wall is at the very bottom. And the only thing usable is this mana cannon. He thinks that with this, the chances of winning are too low. He needs to find a way with a better chance of winning. He just needs to calm down. When playing in Man of Steel mode, it is no longer possible to save and load the game. So as soon as he makes a mistake, the game ends. Because of this, it is incredibly important to make rational decisions every second. Since he spent the last 6 months playing this game, he knows something for sure. In any situation, you can do something and survive it. He looks through many windows of the system and thinks that he needs something even with a small chance of survival. Something with at least a little more confidence. He clicks on the system window and thinks he needs to find it. Ash kicks the door open and calls Lucas loudly. He goes outside and asks loudly where he is. Lucas, who is standing next to this door, loudly tells His Highness that he is here. Something happened. Ash turns to him and says that he must immediately summon those directly under his control. Lucas looks at him blankly and asks His Highness, does he mean his guards? He had never called them before. How is it? He doesn't have time to finish his question because Ash loudly says that he should stop talking and call them together quickly. He points his finger at Lucas, and this surprises him very much. He keeps pointing at him and says with a smile that he has figured out how they can get out of this situation. Sometime later, Ash sits down on his chair and says that's great. Is everyone here already? Lucas stands in front of him with several people who react differently to what is happening. Ash looks at them all with a calm expression and thinks that their faces are so familiar. He remembers the names of these characters from the game and looks at the smiling girl with the staff, whose name is Lily. He looks at the armored man with a dissatisfied expression, whose name is Ken. He looks at the bespectacled priest sitting on the floor hugging his knees and wonders if this is Damien. Ash plunges into memories and thinks that, in principle, they should be familiar. The whole room except Lucas turns bloody, and he thinks it's because he's seen them die countless times. Ash asks why he was curled up anyway. Lily realized he meant Damien and looked at him. His face turned red due to very strong sadness, and tears began to flow from his eyes. She turns and says that he is like this because he lost a comrade today. She asks to understand him. Ash remembers this and thinks that he was like this throughout the entire game training. Since he had an abnormal condition from the very beginning, he was destined to die first. He remembers that he was the most useless, although he had the most important role, the healer. Ash says with a calm expression, let's start. He pauses for a moment and says that he will use this time to explain to all of them what their roles will be tomorrow. Lily will be the first. She looks at him with a smile and agrees with His Imperial Highness. Ash thinks she is a mage who specializes in fire-type attacks. She is the main damage dealer on this team, capable of casting one powerful spell after another. He says she will be their shield. She should block the spider's attacks like their main tank. Lily was very embarrassed by this and told His Imperial Highness that she was a magician. Ash ignores her and calls out to Ken, who stands with a displeased expression on his face. He thinks he is a knight with a shield, capable of attracting the attention of enemies in the vanguard. He uses area attacks to attract attention and last through all attacks. In other words, he is a tank. Ash says that he must sneak into the center of the spider rows and cause disruption to the formations. Ken was very surprised when he heard this and asks, is he supposed to sneak in and cause disruption? Ash says Damien now. He thinks that, as he thought earlier, he is a healer, the most important class in the game. He says that from now on, he will become the sniper of this team. He will have to kill the most important targets. And now the last thing, Lucas. He will command the remaining soldiers to maintain the front line against the wall. They are all silent for a few seconds and look at him. Ash wonders what's going on. They should say something already. Ken clenched his teeth very hard out of anger after what he had just heard. He punches the wall very hard and asks loudly, "Does he call this nonsense a plan?" With a very dissatisfied expression on his face, he asks His Imperial Highness, "Did he say all this seriously?" He put them in great danger with his erroneous orders, and now he's seriously saying something like that. Ash was very embarrassed by his reaction, looks at him incomprehensibly, and thinks that it wasn't him. But this idiot Ash. It's true, although it sounds like the ravings of a madman. This level cannot be passed by conventional methods. And this means that there is nothing left but madness, right? So he cannot retreat here. He calls Ken with a serious expression on his face. He looks at him with a very angry expression and asks in a terrifying voice, to the son of the Emperor and the highest commanding officer of this entire place, "Is he being disobedient?" He looks at them with a frighteningly terrible look. Everyone who was here was very embarrassed because of this, did not look at him, and could not say anything to him. Ken trembles very much because of the horror of him, and cannot say anything about this. He is very worried and tries to justify himself, but cannot find the words. Ash looks at him with an evil smile, emits a dark aura, and thinks that this is exactly how it is. The person opposite him is that crazy psychopath. Ultimately, if he loses the initiative, it will all be over. He slowly gets up from his chair. He walks to the middle of the room while Lily looks at him incomprehensibly and thinks that since his plan is a senseless and reckless act. Ash begins to slowly remove his dagger from its sheath. After that, he swings this dagger very sharply and thinks that he needs them to follow him unquestioningly. He plunges his dagger into the shoulder of Lily, who is standing next to him. What he did greatly shocked all the other people who were in the room and watching what was happening. Lily's body begins to shake due to extreme horror, and she cannot say anything due to the fact that she was shocked by the pain. Ash smiles and asks, "They all have the ability to complete their tasks, don't they?" He thinks that since he is in the body of a psychopath, he will behave the same way as this crazy idiot. They all continue to stand in their places and look at how he holds the dagger in Lily's shoulder. Ken is very shocked by what happened and thinks that the prince has definitely gone crazy. Doesn't he know how valuable mages are? How are they supposed to fight when they are commanded by this idiot? Suddenly, flames begin to appear from Lily's wound. Ash, with a calm expression on his face, looks at this flame that engulfs his dagger, and this greatly surprises her. All the other people were very surprised by what was happening in front of them and looked at it. Ash looks at this flame with a smile and says that this is what was supposed to happen. He thinks that maybe the developer added it just as a joke, but all the characters from the tutorial have a hidden ability. An ability that is completely contrary to their roles. Ash asks Lily when she was a child, she was cut by a blade, right? When a horde of goblins invaded her village. After that incident, she acquired the ability of fire skin. She looks at the flames that come from her body with a sad expression on her face and cries. In the system window, it is written that the fiery skin skill is an ability created by extreme fear of sharp weapons. She is able to defend herself from physical attacks by turning her skin into fire. Each hit consumes mana points. Ash says that as long as she doesn't run out of mana, she can block any attack. He's right. Lily continues to cry and silently look at him with a sad expression on her face. He thinks that the main damage dealer has the tank ability. There was no way to use this properly in the game. However, this is reality. He pulls the dagger from her shoulder and thinks that he plans to take full advantage of this ability. A wide smile appears on his face, and he thinks, is this level impossible to pass? In this case, he can only play dishonestly. Just like the freak who threw him here said, he will complete this damned game, but then he will grab him and beat him so badly that even his own mother will not recognize him. Ash removes his dagger completely from Lily's shoulder and says that he asks for forgiveness for having to resort to such a cruel method to prove the plan was correct. Lily tells His Highness that everything is fine. However, how did he know this? Ash thought about what to answer her and says that it is not so important now. He turns around and calls Ken with an angry look on his face. This scared him very much and sweat started running down his face as he stared at it. Ash surprises him greatly by asking him when he was a kid. He used to steal sometimes, right? He is from the slums, where this is typical. It seems that it was very difficult to become a knight. Ken is confused by what he said and asks how he knows all this. Ash looks at him with a smile and says that, like he said earlier, it doesn't matter now. The important thing is that thanks to this, he will be able to do what he said. The system notifies that he has a pickpocket survival skill. Habits from his days as a pickpocket. He is able to hide his presence in the face of a threat and avoid attention. Consumes a huge amount of health points. Ash asks, he can be as secretive as he wants, right? He can hide, avoiding unnecessary attention. He raises his dagger and with an evil smile says that he must answer if he does not want him to reveal everything on his own. Ken immediately bows to him and loudly tells him that he doesn't have to do that. He's right, he really can do it. Ash says that's good. In this case, he will be able to complete his mission. He puts his dagger on the table with a loud sound and speaks, and finally they move on to Damien. He looks at this priest who is sitting in the corner of the room. Ash slowly walks towards him and thinks that he is the most important person in this regard. He sits down in front of him and asks with a kind smile, he has just gorgeous eyes, doesn't he? Therefore, he was able to clearly see the death of his friend. Damien lowered his head and remained silent for several seconds with a sad expression. He says he was his friend from his hometown. They were from the same shelter. In the middle of the battle, he decided to sacrifice himself to save him. He starts crying and asks His Highness why he brought them all here. Ash silently looks at him with a serious expression on his face, and Damien asks what his goal was. Or are their miserable lives nothing more than mere entertainment for him? He asks to return Van to him. He must return his friend to him. He hangs his head, continues to cry, and with a very sad expression on his face, says loudly that he must return it. Ash put his hand on his shoulder, and after that he raised his head. He looks at him with a serious expression and says that he can blame him for that. If necessary, he may even despise him. But his friend Wang sacrificed his life to save him. Is he going to just sit here and wait to die? Finding himself at the gates of death because of a bad commander, is he really ready to simply give up his life, for which his friend sacrificed himself? He must resist with all his might and avenge him. Ash hits his chest hard with his free hand and loudly says that he has to kill the spiders, get out of here alive, and teach him a lesson. He wants to kill those damned spiders, doesn't he? Damien has stopped crying and looks at him and agrees with what he said. Ash looks at him with a serious expression on his face and asks if he wants to kill him. Damien looks down with a sad expression on his face, thinks about it all for a few seconds, and agrees with him again. What he said greatly surprised all the other people who were in this room. Ash smiles widely at the fact that he admitted it and says it's great. He points his finger at himself and says that he promises him, if they get out of here alive, then he wants him to be the one to take his life. Whenever that happens. Lucas is very indignant about this and loudly calls for His Highness, but Ash stops him with a hand gesture. He calmly sits in front of Damien and says that if the plan fails, they will all die here anyway, in which case he would allow him to take his life. He looks at him with an encouraging smile and says that he swears on the honor of the imperial family. One day will be enough. So he asks him to follow the orders he gives. Damien is surprised by what he said and looks at him silently. Ash thinks that sometimes you have to use hatred as fuel. Damien begins to stand up after his speech, and he thinks that even if this hatred is directed at him. Ash turns to the rest of the people in this room and looks at them. He says with a guilty expression that he will not make excuses. Due to his critical error in judgment, their army is almost destroyed. But thanks to his plan, they will be able to push these monsters back. Although this is thin ice, there is still a chance to win. So just once. He asks them just once to trust him and follow his orders. He thinks his hand is finally collected. All the people he gathered in this room look at him with serious expressions on their faces. He thinks he doesn't know whether it will be a royal straight, a flush, or nothing at all. However, apart from all in, he has nothing left. The next morning, the guard beats the drum and says loudly that the army of black spiders is approaching. The monsters are coming. One of the soldiers who stands at the monocannons asks His Highness, "Is he really going to be okay?" Ash stands next to them and says that he shouldn't worry and do as he says. The soldier immediately loudly agrees with him. A huge army of large spiders begins to run very quickly towards the fortress they are in, and he thinks that the plan is simple. While the team members are buying time, they will find the queen who gives orders to the spiders. And after that, they will blow her head off with this mana cannon. By removing the limiter, they increased the magical power. So cannon should be able to cope even with the queen. The only problem is the queen's disposition. They need to find it at a sufficiently large distance. This cannot be done with simple eyes. Is this even possible? Ash smiles widely. A bright light appears in front of him, and he uses the map creation skill. He thinks that of course it is possible when he is here. He creates a huge wall of energy that passes through him and does nothing. This large wall of energy begins to quickly move towards where the spiders will have to go. Ash looks at the system window in front of him and thinks that his character's skill, map creation, is an ability that allows the owner to see the surrounding area as a minimap. When he first saw these nightmarish characteristics, he was slightly shocked. But the fact that he at least has this skill, already a relief. In the system window his name is written, and that he is the first level. The title is the Vile Prince. The class is new. All characteristics have 1 point. Ash looks at the system window with the map and thinks that he will look now. Where is she hiding? If he can find the boss mark. He was very surprised because of something and wondered what it meant. He looks at this map with great surprise and wonders, is there no monster boss mark here? The goal of this mission, the enemy queen, is not on the map at all. At this time, Ken stands alone in front of the gate, which opens especially for him, and looks at the sun that shines on him. Last night, Ash placed a variety of red liquid potions on the table and said that he should take this. He collected all the stamina potions that were left in the fortress. He must come out and get their attention. Does he think he can handle it? At the same time, Lily stands in the underground passage. Her body trembles violently, and she remembers the words that Ash said to her earlier. He said that she also had a difficult but important role. In case the spiders manage to get even into the artillery unit, she relies on her to use her fiery skin to block the entrance. Lily consoles herself by saying that she can do it. At the same time, Lucas stands on the street and loudly says that everyone must line up. The soldiers who stand on the wall aim their crossbows and place cannons along the entire perimeter of this wall. He takes out his sword and looks at the huge army of spiders that are running towards the fortress. He says loudly that they must endure this. They need to buy enough time to kill the queen. He turns to the tower Ash is standing on and says that this dignified expression certainly means that... He pauses, raises his sword above his head, and loudly says that His Highness has completed all preparations. Ash at this time looks at the system window in front of him with a very worried expression on his face and thinks that they should wait. Lucas says loudly that they should open fire. Immediately after this, the guards begin to attack the army of monsters approaching them with crossbows and cannons. The cannonballs explode a large crowd of spiders, who quickly move towards them with loud sounds. Lucas stands in front of the explosions and gives a thumbs up with a wide smile. Ash looks at him and doesn't say anything because he's very worried about what just happened. He thinks he needs to stay calm. First of all, the main goal of the training is not to kill the boss monsters. The fact that the Spider Queen is not on the map at all is not surprising. Most likely, the marker will appear during a full-scale attack. They have a reliable rear. The guards are ready for emergencies. All they have to do is wait. This is the only place where the queen can be. He notices a large number of red marks heading their way and calls out loudly for Damien. Ash points in the direction where these marks are and asks if he sees them over there. His finger points to a road where there are no monsters at all. Damien looks in that direction, agrees and says that he sees a bunch of spiders gathered in a circle. Ash looks at him with a surprised expression and thinks that he thought it was possible, but could it be? He doesn't finish his thought and says that there must be a queen among them. Can he find her? Damien stares into the distance as his eyes glow faintly and says nothing for a few seconds. He sees a monster with a very scary face and asks, is he talking about a monster whose lower body is like a spider's and his upper body is like a human's? Ash begins to smile widely and thinks that this snaggle-toothed freak has been caught. He says that's what he's talking about. Damien mulls this over and asks if this doesn't look suspicious. Ash says he doesn't need to be afraid. Soon she will receive a charge from the cannons and die in agony. They must turn the gun emplacement to face southwest. They need to aim accurately. The soldier looks at the glow that comes from the cannons and says that the mana charge is ready. They can fire on command. Ash says that's great. He turns to Damien, calls his name, and says that he has to end this. This surprised him very much, and he shuddered because of the surprise. He holds the handle with a shaking hand and hesitantly calls out to His Highness. Ash looks at him and asks, "What is it?" Damien looks at him with a scared look and says that he is not sure. He had never done anything like this. Besides, he forces him so unexpectedly. He doesn't have time to finish because Ash, with a serious expression on his face, calls him by name. He puts his hand on his shoulder and tells him that he might miss. He thinks that he will take full responsibility upon himself. He says with a serious expression that even if he misses and ruins the whole plan, everything will be fine. He need not be afraid. He thinks that all consequences are the responsibility of the commander. Soldiers do only what they are ordered to do. Ash says all he has to do is pull the trigger. That's all. This is his revenge for Van. Damien's eyes begin to glow brightly after what he told him, and the system notifies him that he is using the 1,000-mile eye ability. With a sharp movement of his hand, he pulls the lever that he was holding with his hand. Because of this, the cannon begins to emit very strong and bright mana in all directions. The gears inside the cannons begin to move, and a stream of mana rushes out of the cannons with loud sounds. Ash looks at it with a smile and tells Damien that this is it. He raises his voice and says that he must wipe these monsters off the face of the earth. After this, a very strong stream of energy flies out of the cannons, which flies towards the monsters. This incredibly powerful beam flies over the wall, next to which there was a large army of monsters. This beam of energy flies far at high speed and changes its trajectory in the air. Ash has high hopes for this shot and says loudly that it should hit. Damien stands next to him and looks with great surprise at this stream of mana that flew out of the cannons. The energy projectile falls to the ground, and this causes a very strong explosion, which can be seen from a great distance. Ash, with a worried expression on his face, turns to the soldier and calls for the lookout, who silently looks through a spyglass in the direction where the explosion occurred. He joyfully and loudly says that the shot reached its target. It hit the monsters straight. Ash says with a happy expression that this is it. Joyful soldiers hug Damien, and one of them with a wide smile says that he's done well. Is he absolutely sure that he is shooting for the first time? He laughs, and Damien, a little flushed from the praise, says that he was just doing what he was told. As soon as he took the trigger, the body itself began to move. Ash looks at him with a smile and wonders what he's talking about. All this is thanks to his ability. This is a completely broken ability that allows you to never miss. In the system window, it is written that the 1,000-mile eye is an ability that became a mistake of God. He can see whatever he wants and hit whatever he wants. Accuracy increases by 999 points. Ash hides his wide smile with his hand, laughs quietly, and thinks that in the game he was a character who was not able to hold a real weapon. But here he just had to grab a cannon. They took the full force of his attack. As expected, he did not finish the thought because something greatly surprised him. He sees that the monsters continue to walk towards the fortress and wonders what is going on. He looks at these spiders and wonders why they are still moving. The watchman, with a worried expression on his face, tells His Highness that the monsters are continuing to advance. Ash turns and asks what's going on. He reaches for the telescope while the soldier says loudly that there is a whole swarm of spiders. They are advancing. Ash took the telescope and looks towards the spiders with a worried expression on his face. Among the fog, he sees a large crowd of spiders walking towards him. He looks at these spiders and wonders, is this a square formation? The Spider Queen opens her mouth wide and screams loudly with a terrifying look. This frightens Ash, and he removes the spyglass from his face in disgust. This loud cry of the Queen reaches the spiders who stood next to the walls of the fortress. All these spiders go back and the soldiers loudly ask where they suddenly went. Spiders are going somewhere. Didn't they hit the queen? Why didn't anything happen to her? Ash looks at this with a very surprised expression on his face and says that this is impossible. The soldier looks through the telescope and says loudly that trouble has occurred. All the spiders run towards the artillery installation. They all see the entire army of spiders moving in the same direction. Ash looks at with a small smile but a worried expression and says that it turns out that she is not so stupid for an insect. At the same time in the forest next to the fortress, from where they are firing cannons at the army of spiders, Ken is looking at something with a very worried expression on his face and is breathing heavily. He takes out the last stamina potion and thinks that he only had one potion left. He sits behind a tree and covers his ears with his hands while loud sounds of explosions are heard next to him. He wonders if he should just run away. He heard very loud noises, gets up and loudly asks what was that. He looks out from behind a tree with a sword in his hands and looks at something for a few seconds. He was very much shocked by what he had just seen. He falls into despair, throws down his sword and kneels. At the same time, Damien uses his skill again and aims the cannon. They fire another shot and the soldier says loudly that they hit the target. They hit the queen. Smoke comes from the barrel of the cannons as Ash stands against the wall and looks into the distance with a worried expression on his face. He looks at the spiders by the wall and thinks that these monsters are continuing their attack. Besides, the Spider Queen is still alive. He begins to worry very much and thinks maybe they don't have enough damage. The queen of the spider army from the game died from 1 or 2 shots from cannons. Still, compared to fighting monsters, she is not that strong. But what about the queen from training? He doesn't have a shred of information about her. What if she has completely different characteristics? What if she has a special ability? Or what if it is impossible to kill her at all? Then what should he do? One of the soldiers loudly calls out to His Imperial Highness and says that due to the strong explosion, the mana core has almost reached its limit. Cannon is on the verge of destruction. They won't be able to shoot as many as they planned. Ash says loudly that he talks too much. How many more shots do they have left? The soldier says that they could have fired 5 shots in total, but they have already fired twice, so there are 3 attempts left. Ash looks at him with a worried expression and thinks that they only have 3 shots. The only option left is to kill the Spider Queen in those 3 shots. Moreover, he is worried about Damien's eyes. There seem to be consequences to using his ability. He holds on to the lever of the cannons with a shaking hand, and Ash thinks that they have a maximum of 3 shots. Can he withstand that much? Other soldiers are firing regular cannons at the army of spiders at the fortress walls, and he thinks that fortunately, the walls of the central castle are doing an excellent job in withstanding the onslaught. One of the soldiers loudly says that a destroyer is approaching them. Ash was very surprised by what he heard and wondered what he said. He sees a huge spider with a large amount of green liquid flowing from its back. He looks at this huge spider and wonders, is the destroyer trying to get inside? There was nothing like that in the game. He says loudly that they must concentrate all their firepower on the destroyer. Many guns standing on the wall begin to fire. But these explosions do not cause the slightest damage to the destroyer, who is quickly moving towards the fortress. Ash looks at how this huge spider runs quickly and thinks that the walls of the fortress will definitely not withstand this. The destroyer hits the wall very hard and destroys it with a very loud sound. He stands still while a huge amount of smoke emanates from his head. The destroyer falls to the ground and a large army of spiders heads in through the hole he made. Ash is very worried about what is happening to the wall. Lucas unsheathes his sword and says loudly that they should all take up arms. They go down to the first floor. Ash says they need to get a grip. The soldiers who are below will protect them. They need to keep shooting at the queen. Before these freaks reach the artillery emplacement, they must kill the queen. After this, one of the soldiers loudly says that all preparations have been completed. Ash turns and loudly calls out to Damien, who is sitting by the cannons and holding the handle. His eyes are very tense due to the use of his ability, but he still sharply pulls the lever with his hand. There is a very strong explosion in the distance, and the soldier loudly says that he hit the target. but the Spider Queen is still alive. Ash turns around and with a worried expression on his face, says loudly that they must load the next projectile immediately. They need to act faster. At the same time, Lucas, who is below, fights with the spiders that have penetrated the walls and puts a large amount of energy into his sword to attack. He does very strong area of effect attacks using his energy and defeats several monsters. He turns around and says loudly that they must protect the artillery installation. They must protect the prince. Ash, who is standing on the tower with a worried expression on his face, looks at what is happening from below. He sees an army of humans fighting against an army of spiders that outnumbers them and outnumbers them in strength. His soldiers, one after another, die from the huge paws of spiders and scream loudly due to severe pain. He clenches his teeth very hard due to tension and thinks that the number of victims is increasing. He didn't even know about it. He remembers how he played the game and thinks that while he was playing it like an ordinary game, he did not know that real people lived in this place. Death is not just a number, but a terrible sight, which is accompanied by screams and the smell of blood. The status window in front of Ash's face closes, and he thinks that at this rate. The soldier next to him loudly says that everyone should grab the cannon, because they need to cool it down. Ash wonders, do they have 5 shots? This cannon will collapse before the 4th shot is fired. Lucas, along with the rest of the soldiers, retreats due to the onslaught of monsters and collides with his back against a wall, turns around and realizes that they have nowhere else to retreat. Ash begins to worry very much about what is happening here and wonders what he should do. A way out of this situation does not occur to him. Suddenly Ken comes to them, calling very loudly for these damned monsters. All the spiders that pass through the wall turn around and look at him. While he says that he is here, they should look at him. Ash was very surprised and calmed down a little when he saw him. He looks at Ken, who drinks his last stamina potion, wipes his face and looks at the army of monsters in front of him with a slightly scared expression. He releases very strong waves with his voice that attract the attention of the monsters as he loudly says that he is Ken, a knight of the Empire. A huge army of spiders has left the remaining soldiers who stand next to Lucas. Ken is very afraid and worried when he sees such a huge army of spiders that are quickly moving towards him. He starts running away while all these monsters are running after him, screams loudly and says that they should all come here. He notices a large stone that stands in his way, and because of this a wide smile appears on his face. He runs behind this stone and asks loudly why don't they try to find it. Ken's body is engulfed by dark energy while he smiles and the system notifies him that he is using the ability of a pickpocket's survival method. Ash looks at the system window that appeared in front of him and is very surprised by what he saw there. With very strong excitement, he loudly calls Ken and says that he must wait his remaining health. He found himself surrounded by a huge number of monsters who were looking at him, and the system notified him that he did not have enough health. Ability activation cancelled. All these monsters attack Ken at the same time, and he, with a frightened expression on his face, says that he should not have trusted this freak. All the monsters brutally attack him, and blood splashes fly in different directions. Ash looks at this with a very worried expression on his face, and the system notifies that he has lost one person from the army. He looks at it with an excited expression on his face, and thinks that even from afar he can clearly hear the terrifying sound of tearing flesh. He sees how spiders eat Ken, and thinks that his orders took away the priceless life of another person. The soldiers run towards the hole in the gate, and someone loudly says that Ken has driven the monsters beyond the defense line. They must attack. Ash is very worried about what happened to him, and thinks that all those people outside are losing their lives because of his one order. He killed them all. More precisely, everything is even much worse. While he was playing through this game, he always used normal NPCs as bait. This damn game is built on bones. When he was playing this game, the system window appeared. Does he want to place Team 2 on this point? He immediately agrees to it. Ash thinks that in order to save someone, to take possession of an item, to complete a side quest, to get an achievement, every time he gladly sent people to their deaths. Every damn time, he didn't doubt his choice one bit. However, now he realized everything. The meaning of the actions he has performed so far. He squeezes his hand very tightly as he stands leaning against the wall and says they have to stop. He says loudly that he told those damn monsters that they should stop. Ash thinks that the truth is that every death entails heartbreaking pain. He loudly says that he must stop, but realizes that they will not stop and sees a large spider that flies towards him. He looks at this with an angry expression on his face and thinks that the monsters cannot be stopped by simple screams. Unexpectedly, this spider is hit by a sword that is controlled using energy. Lucas looks on as sweat runs down his face, controls the sword with his energy, and asks how dare he target the prince. He stands in the middle of soldiers and spiders who are fighting each other and loudly asks His Highness if he is okay. Ash looks at the spider, which is caught on the edge of the tower and is in pain and making loud noises. He takes his dagger out of its sheath and says that he understands everything. He cuts off the head of this spider with one blow and thinks that there is only one way to stop these monsters. He looks at it with an angry expression and thinks that this is a way to kill them before they kill them. The soldier standing by the overheated gun loudly calls His Highness and says that the fourth shell is loaded. However, Damien will not be able to. Ash doesn't listen to what he says next, calls his name loudly and asks if he can shoot. Damien tries to wipe away the blood that is flowing from his eyes and loudly agrees with His Highness. He pulls the handle of the gun and the cannon immediately fires a powerful projectile. This projectile flies at high speed towards the Spider Queen, and she looks at it carefully. It makes a very loud sound, and many spiders jump towards this projectile. All these monsters fly by and are destroyed by this stream of energy. The Spider Queen begins to scream even louder and looks at this projectile that is flying towards her. Ash looks at this and thinks that the fourth shot hit the queen right in the head. However, this damn queen is still alive. She makes a very loud scream and sends out strong sound waves. Ash is very shocked by what happened, and these loud screams of the Spider Queen reach them. All the knights who stand on this tower fell into despair and fell to their knees due to hopelessness. The soldier looks at the burns on his hands due to them trying to cool the cannon, and he says that their attacks won't work. The soldier looks at Ash with a worried expression and says that the cannon has reached its limit. If they try to shoot one more time, it will simply explode. In any case, everything is of course. They might just give up. Ash breathes heavily because of his anxiety, looks at this soldier and wonders, is this really the end? He examines the barrel of this gun and thinks that the cannon is on the verge of destruction. He looks down and thinks that their line of defense has been broken. Damien, as a sniper, can no longer even open his own eyes. Is this really the end? He gives up and wonders, do they really have any hope left? The soldier who looks through the telescope says loudly that everything is not so bad. Their shots were not in vain. Ash was very surprised when he heard this and suddenly turns to him. The soldier looks at the Spider Queen and loudly says that her skin was damaged. Ash was very surprised when he heard this and thinks that despite this whole situation, the lookout remained true to his role until the very end. The soldier does not pay attention to the green shell that flies in their direction and loudly says that if they shoot again, they will definitely be able to kill this monster. Ash was very surprised when he saw this and cannot say anything about it. The shell hits the tower they were standing on and explodes very violently. Lucas notices what happened there and, with a very worried expression on his face, loudly calls out for His Highness. The tower is destroyed and Ash, along with everything that was on this tower, falls down. He falls down along with the rubble and thinks that everything is destroyed. A whole world and hope of passing, all lost. He hears Lucas's voice calling His Highness and blurrily sees him in front of him. Ash finally comes to his senses and very sharply opens his eyes. He lies on the ground while Lucas stands in front of him, saving him from the rubble with his body. Ash suddenly stands up and calls his name loudly with a worried look on his face. Lucas, who was very badly injured, asks His Highness if he was hurt anywhere. Ash says loudly that he should be the one asking him this question. He is okay? He falls silent because he notices that Lucas is bleeding profusely and falls to the floor. With a sad expression on his face, he asks His Highness if he remembers that same case, which is already 20 years old. Ash thinks he can't remember it. As a player who simply borrowed the character's body, he has no memory of anything connecting them. Lucas says that when His Highness first chose him as his guard, he told him on that spot. Ash asks, what did he say then? Lucas goes into a flashback and repeats what he said back then and says that even if he can't become emperor, he will become the coolest man in the world. So, as the one who will become his knight, he must strive to be the coolest knight in the world. Although this happened when he was just a child, the words of His Highness touched him so much that he carried it all his life until this very day. He believes in His Highness. Ash looks at him with a slightly sad expression on his face and asks if he continues to believe, even in such a situation. Lucas says with a serious expression that he believes in him anytime, anywhere. He loses his last strength, falls to the ground, and the large stone slab that he was holding falls on him. Some time later, Ash pulled it out and carefully placed it on the ground. He looks at him with a worried expression and thinks that Lucas should hold on. He is the main character, the savior of this world. He shouldn't die here. He looks around and thinks that first he needs to understand the situation. Are they under artillery fire right now? How long was he unconscious? He turns and notices a mana cannon and several soldiers lying on the ground. Ash looks at them and thinks that this is Damien and the rest of the gunners. Fortunately, they appear to have escaped fatal injury. The same cannot be said about Cannon. Speaking of which, why are they still alive? What happened to the spiders? He hears Lily's voice calling for His Highness, and Ash notices her while she is burning and that blood is flowing down her face. She uses her last strength to hold back several spiders and asks if this is not the end, is it? She clenches her teeth tightly in pain as the spiders attack her. Lily looks at him with one eye and asks hopefully, is this true? Ash runs towards her and calls her name loudly, but Lily puts out her hand to stop him. Her hand trembles greatly due to pain, and in her other hand she holds a potion and says that she can't stand it anymore. Now she can still hold back the passage, but soon the monsters will break through the walls. She raises her voice and says there is no more time, he must act faster. She looks at him with a serious expression and says that he must not make their deaths useless. Ash looks at her with a sad expression on his face and clenches his teeth tightly out of resentment. He turns to the soldiers and loudly says that these idiots must stand up and load the last shell. A very tired soldier calls His Highness and says that he already told him. He turns around and says that cannon has already reached its limit. As soon as they fire, the cannon will explode. Ash looks away and says that if they don't do anything, they will rot in the monsters' stomachs. Wouldn't it be better to take the risk at least once? They have to do. The soldier looks at him for a few seconds, says nothing and thinks about it all. He looks around and asks how they will aim. They don't even see what's outside. There is no way they can get to the queen from here. They don't even have a cannon rack anymore. Ash says that then they will hold the cannon in their hands. He thinks that if he is left without teeth, he should continue to chew with his gums. He says they will aim no matter what. The main thing is that Damien shoots. They were silent for a few seconds, and he says that they must load the last shell. That's an order. The soldier with a worried expression says that he understands him. Ash walks and thinks that he cannot say exactly how the 1,000-mile eye works. But if he shoots, the projectile will always reach its target. They can only believe in him. He stops in front of Damien and calls his name. He immediately turns to him and Ash says that this is the last time. He needs to shoot one more time. He asks him to do it again. Damien looks at him, but his vision is so blurry that he can barely see anything. He sits still and asks His Highness, what is the point of all this? No matter what he does, nothing will change. Ash looks at him and thinks about what he said. He says that this monster will definitely die if he hits her one more time. Damien says that's not what he's talking about. Let's say he pulls the trigger again and this spider queen dies. What will change then? He looks down with a sad expression on his face and says that half of his friends are already dead. Even if he takes revenge on all his enemies, he will not be able to bring them back. No matter how desperately he works, how hard he tries. The world always takes everything away from him. Ash looks at him and calls his name. Damien says he wants to stop this. He doesn't want to continue living like this. He wants to go to Van. Ash doesn't let him finish and calls his name very loudly, which surprises him very much. He asks very loudly, Does he think this world is meaningless? Does he think that if serious difficulties are overcome, life will continue to be a living hell? Damien turns to him and looks at him silently with a surprised expression on his face. Ash grabs him by the clothes, lifts him up, and with an angry expression on his face, says loudly that then he should stop talking obvious nonsense. If this world has any complexity, it is definitely hellish. Also the Man of Steel mode, in which he cannot even survive. He thinks it wasn't a game. From the very beginning, it was a world of hellish complexity with a Man of Steel mode. Ash loudly says that all this is pointless and ridiculous because nothing is going according to his plan. This is life. Who doesn't know this yet? They live in this destructive environment. He's gonna stop fighting, so what? Did he decide to just leave to become waste that would fall out of the spider? Just because of this? This is not true. They must continue to fight. Until death overtakes them. He will fight. He will fight and strategize until his last breath. Ash takes out his dagger and says that since he wants to end everything so easily, he can cut off his own head with this dagger right now. He placed the blade on the shoulder of Damien, who sits silently on the ground and looks at him with a surprised expression. Ash throws the dagger aside with a sharp movement of his hand and says that if he is a coward who is not capable of this. He pauses, looks into Damien's face, and says that then he must press the cannon's lever. He should stop looking for his dead friend. All he needs to do his job is to obey him, his commander. He doesn't need some trivial reason to live. He raises his voice and says that he is his tool, his key, his trigger. Nothing more is required of him. That's all he needs from him. The system notifies that he has unlocked a new skill. Passive skill Indomitable Commander. Ash looks at him with eyes filled with energy and says that these are his orders. He must pull the trigger. He puts his hand on Damien's shoulder, looks at him and says that he must destroy the head of this damned Spider Queen. They look at each other for a few seconds and Damien agrees with His Highness in a decisive voice. He looks at him with a calm expression and says that he will carry out his order. The soldier says loudly that the last shell is loaded. He says with a worried expression on his face that there is no way to cool the barrel of the cannons. Saturates. He doesn't have time to finish because Ash doesn't listen to him and says that they need to move. He looks at the cannon from which steam is coming and says that he will hold the cannon. The worried soldier was surprised by this and loudly called for His Highness. He says cannon is too hot. If he touches it, it won't be a normal burn. Ash sat down next to the cannon and said that it is better to burn alive than to die and fall into the depths of hell. He sits next to Cannon and asks Damien if he is ready. He stands next to him and tells His Highness that he does not see. Ash says it doesn't matter. Damien says he can't feel his hands. Ash says again that it doesn't matter. He looks at him with a smile, calls him by name, and says that it doesn't matter. He grabs the cannon with both hands and begins to lift this cannon. He clenches his teeth very hard and screams loudly because of the pain he is experiencing. He continues to hold this very hot cannon and picks it up. The soldiers look at this with great surprise, and one of them loudly says that they must help His Highness. They all come up to him, grab this cannon, and start picking it up. Suddenly, a huge destroyer spider breaks through and quickly runs towards them. Ash calls Damien loudly with a very determined look on his face and looks ahead. He uses his eye of 1,000-mile skill, causing blood to flow from his eyes and him to clench his teeth tightly in pain. Ash loudly says that he must shoot and Damien immediately pulls the lever. Cannon begins to emit very strong and bright energy while the soldiers and Ash hold it with serious expressions on their faces. A projectile bursts out of the cannons along with a very strong and huge flow of mana. The projectile flies out of the ruins of the tower with great speed and flies over a crowd of spiders that are running towards them. Everyone threw the cannon immediately after the shot, fell to the ground, and a huge crowd of spiders was running towards them, and Ash hoped that the projectile would hit the target. He falls to the ground and thinks that this was an impossible task at first. A shot at an enemy whom they cannot even see under the rubble of a fallen fortress. There is not even a chance that it will hit the target. The projectile at this time continues to fly at high speed, and he thinks that, however, he is sure that the projectile is flying directly at the Spider Queen. And this projectile doesn't care about the difference in height, no matter what the distance will be. and even hundreds of thousands of monsters that may be in the path of this projectile, as if it were simply reproducing the selected result. The projectile flew at the Spider Queen, who screams in anger or fear and hits her head exactly. The shell completely destroys her damned head. Ash reminisces about his life as a streamer. Someone wrote to him that he was simply incredible. How he did it. He looks at his computer screen with a surprised expression and thinks that he is speechless because of this. This was the first message he received when he first started streaming. He didn't even know how to react to this. Someone writes that he will subscribe to his channel. He'll still be streaming, right? Ash thinks he doesn't really remember what he wrote back then. He suddenly opens his eyes, feels very strong pain, and wonders if he is still alive. He tries to get up, but feels even more severe pain, and his entire body was wrapped in bandages. Someone tells His Highness that she does not advise him to get up yet. Ash was very surprised by this and looks at the person who said it. Lily writes something on a piece of paper and says that Damien healed his wounds with magic. But he has severe burns all over his body, so it will take some time for him to fully recover. Ash calls her name, after which Lily puts her quill on the table and tells His Highness that he has slept for 3 days. She says with a kind smile that she was afraid that he would never open his eyes again after that battle with the army of spiders. Ash looks at her with a surprised expression, lowers his head, and says that she survived. Lily says it's thanks to His Highness' orders. The spider army retreated immediately after they beheaded the Spider Queen. She calls him again, His Highness, and says that they have won. Some time ago. Soldiers clear the rubble and carry away the bodies of their dead comrades on stretchers. They also burn the bodies of the killed spiders, and Lily in the present says that the reinforcements took care of the dead and also got rid of the remnants of the enemy army. The cleanup is almost complete. Ash looks out the window next to the bed he is lying on and says that he has figured it out. Lily looks at him with a worried expression and tells His Highness that he has suffered severe burns on his hands, arms, shoulders, and neck. When they return to Crossroad, he will need to visit the temple. However, even after full recovery, he will still have scars. Ash looks at his bandaged hand and says that it's a small price to pay to save his life. He calls her name and asks how she is feeling. He looks at her, wants to say something about her wounds, but stops when he notices that she is sitting in a wheelchair. What he saw shocked him very much. He fell silent and looked at her with a surprised expression on his face. Lily adjusts the blanket that lies on her legs and says that when she ran out of mana, one spider injured her back. Then the Spider Queen died immediately, so she was no longer attacked. She tries to keep smiling, but her face was very sad, and she says that, however, it seems that that wound has damaged the nerve, and she will no longer be able to move her lower body. Ash was very surprised by this and couldn't say anything due to the shock of what he heard. Lily tells His Highness that he has nothing to worry about. She begins to smile sincerely and says that she is grateful to fate for being alive after everything that happened. With the exception of 5 artillerymen, Lucas, Damien, and the 2 of them survived. This is everyone who survived this event. Ash covers his face with his hand and, with a very sad expression on his face, thinks that only 9 people survived. There were more than 200 of them, but only 9 people remained. He remembers all the people and what happened to them and wonders, was there really no other way out? A better way that he failed to notice. Maybe there was a way to save more people. He is knocked out of this state by Lily, who puts her hand on his arm and tells His Highness that he is not omnipotent. She looks at him and says that in that situation, it was impossible to save everyone. He did everything in his power. Ash still remains sad and says that he is the only one responsible for this battle. He thinks that even though Ash started it, but since he is now the one in this body, the responsibility lies with him too. Lily says that no one knew that monsters would attack the whole river for decades. That is why no one stopped him when he started the war. So she asks him not to blame himself for this. Ash thinks about all this and looks down with a sad expression on his face. Unexpectedly, Lucas sharply opens the door to this room and, with tears in his eyes, loudly calls out to His Highness. He cries loudly, walks towards him and says that he is incredibly glad that he woke up. He leans towards him and with a very worried expression on his face asks if something hurts. he'll call Damien right away. His behavior surprised Lily very much, and Ash says that he doesn't need to do this and he should calm down because he's fine. He's wounded too, isn't he? Shouldn't he be worried about his own injuries? Lucas radiates a bright aura and with a wide smile says that he knows him. He's such a tough nut to crack. This is where its strength lies. Ash looks at him and thinks it goes without saying. He is the strongest knight of this century. Lucas takes out a long list consisting of several sheets of paper and tells His Highness that while he was unconscious, he compiled a list of those killed in that battle. Unfortunately, they were unable to find all the bodies. But they did their best. Ash asks where the corpses are now. Lucas says they are in the northern plains at a forward deployment point. Ash says he wants to see them. He immediately gets up, puts on his clothes, and Lucas loudly calls out to His Highness in a worried voice. Lily is also worried about this and says that he cannot do this. He hasn't fully recovered yet. Ash says with a serious expression that they lost lives under his command. He will go to them and Lucas must help him. After some time, they walk together along a large wall and he carries Ash on his back. He looks ahead with a puzzled expression about what is happening and thinks that he feels like a backpack. He calls him by name and asks if he wants to become his horse. Lucas says if that's what he wants, then he's okay with it. Ash says it's just a joke. He shouldn't take it so seriously. They notice Damien standing by a hole in the wall and looking into the distance. Ash called his name, after which he turns to them and says with a happy expression that he is glad that he woke up. Ash gets to his feet and asks how are his eyes. Damien says he's fine. Vision gradually returns. He takes off his glasses and says that he can look at everything the same as before. Ash looks at him with a sad expression and thinks he heard about him taking care of wounded soldiers alone. He walked around the entire field, using healing magic, despite the fact that he could not see anything. His ordeal was no less difficult than his. Ash calls him by name and says that thanks to him, they were able to successfully achieve their goal. If he wishes, he will reward him in such a way that for the rest of his days, he will not need to worry about his prosperity. And, of course, he would no longer have to fight on the battlefield. First of all, he is a mercenary soldier, so he is free to do what he sincerely desires. Damien is silent for a few seconds and thinks about what he said. He tells His Highness that he then said that his trigger. He wants to find out where all these monsters come from. Who created all these monsters and for what purpose. He wants to find out why Van died. He tells His Highness with a serious expression that, therefore, he asks to be allowed to continue following him. Lucas smiles as he looks at him because of what he just said. Ash smiles too and says it's a great decision. He lets him. They just need a clergyman to honor the memory of those they have lost. Sometime later, they, along with the rest of the soldiers, stand in front of two people who are standing near a large blue flame and many bodies of dead soldiers, which are covered with a cloth. Ash looks at all this, blue flames reflected in his eyes, and thinks that he knew very well that there was no better way. That there was no better strategy. There is nothing stupider than thinking about how everything could be changed when everything has already happened. He chose a strategy that he implemented. And this is the result he got. Therefore, he must take responsibility. He will put it on his shoulders and move on. Ash tells Lucas, who is standing next to him, that as soon as the funeral is over, he must take all the bodies and move them. He thinks Crossroad has thousands of disasters every year. Funerals cost more than the lives of people in this world. He says there is a vacant lot to the south of Crossroad. He must honor their memory and bury them there. He thinks he's going to make a cemetery in the southern vacant lot where he placed memorials in the game. Ash continues to stand still and says that once a year, every other month, they will honor the memory of those who sacrificed their lives in the war. Lucas bows to him and tells His Highness that he obeys him. Ash thinks that this was done not only for the sake of these people, and also for all those whom he killed without remorse over a long time in the game. He imagines himself in real life in this place and thinks that this is his redemption. He calls Lucas and with a serious expression on his face says that he will never lose again. He clenches his teeth tightly out of anger at himself and says that he will never make mistakes again. He turns around and says they are heading back to their main base, Crossroad. The system notifies that the prologue is completed. He received a reward for completing it. He needs to check his inventory.